Yeah, welcome everyone. This is the second webinar of our webinar series, parting from the book All In. The book is organized into 6 webinars, and this is the second, the book is organized into 6 propositions, and this is the second proposition on class. The webinars are independent from each other, and the first one was on globalization. You can check the recording on our website and on YouTube. This one is called Class Against Class, with the subtitle Historical Agency for System Change at the Time of Exacerbating Social, Political, and Climate Crises. I'll just give a sense of what this is, what the session will be about. So, as globalized capitalism is pushing us off the cliff to civilizational collapse, and so how is it doing it? It's doing it through climate crisis, wars and militarization, increased cost of living, austerity, the ever-increasing precarious and deregulated working conditions for wage labor and for non-wage labor as well, the crisis of care, the extractive, neocolonial extractive projects, and the rise of authoritarian regimes. So through all of these ways, globalized capitalism is pushing us off to civilizational collapse. And so as this is happening, social movements around the world are looking for ways to organize and mobilize the gravediggers of capitalism. So in order to do that, this task itself requires that we have a relatively clear understanding of who those gravediggers would be, right? Who are the historical subjects for system change? And this webinar is therefore about class struggle. It's about how the antagonism between capital and labor play out in today's world. So this is more or less the topic. And in this webinar in particular, we will have a couple of speakers that I'd like to introduce. So I myself, I am Sinan. I am a co-author of the book All In with Mariana Rodriguez. I'll be moderating this session. And with me, I have Leonor, who is a climate justice activist in Climaximo, based in Lisbon. She took part in the coordination of the climate jobs campaign in Portugal, but also in the network Global Climate Jobs. So she has been in contact with the trade union movement in Europe. Then I have Sergio, who is from Romania and Germany. He was a social worker with houseless people and a social consultant for East European migrants for different organizations. I would say he's involved in both of the countries, but his major focus in the last 5 years has been his work as an organizer with the Free Workers Union, where he focuses on organizing Romanian migrant workers on construction sites, factories, and the agricultural field. And then we also have Irina, who's a researcher in the University of Coimbra in Portugal. Her work has been focused on environmental movements in Eastern Europe, also related to the commons and the struggles around that. And she will be bringing the ecofeminist perspective to class. So each one will talk about different aspects of class formation and class struggle. So I would like to start with an image that I will just copy from the book, which is kind of our starting point. So this is one of the ways that ecofeminism brought into working class politics, where you typically start, let's say, thinking about labor or working class through the eyes of the unionized wage labor. And if you're coming from climate, you're also looking at carbon intensive sectors because you want to talk about transition or whatever. But then there is also all this wage labor at the center, right? And then it's surrounded by a bunch of things that are not wage labor in any way. They're definitely not unionized, but they're also not even wage labor. So those are what's called informal economy surrounding wage labor. And then you would be talking about reproductive labor, which is non-exchange value producing, but actual use value producing and reproducing the labor itself. And then over that, we would think about metabolic labor, earth care labor, of maintaining the physical conditions of life on Earth. So capitalism would consider this as in the center, you would have the union or unionized or wage labor, and then everything else would become peripheral or marginalized in the sense of how we address value creation, but also how we value work. So that's one way of looking at it, but obviously you can also think about it in terms of, so one way of looking at it is center margin. Another way of looking at it is actually thinking of it as if you're looking at it from the top. So everything is based on metabolic labor, earth-care labor, that is then carrying reproductive labor, and reproductive labor is carrying all the other, let's say, formally economic activities in some way or another. So you can also think of it as such. So not necessarily. So when we draw this, we not necessarily assume that one is central, but we understand that in today's world, there is a center margin relationship. But when you look at it from what we learned from feminist critique, is that you can actually see of it as in one is on top of the other, so the other one is somehow containing or at least carrying the other activities. So this is going to be my opening. We want to look at these various aspects from whatever perspective we can get from unionized workers, from less unionized, more precarious workers, and the people who are doing most of the other work on the more margins, let's say, of the system, the economic system. So the kind of questions that we would like to explore is how all of these kinds of labor, how their actual relationship and experience is with global capital today, right? So how do they find themselves as class, and how are they also getting activated as gravediggers, right? So what is the conflict going on? What is the real life conflict going on? And then also explore a little bit what are difficulties and obstacles in creating class consciousness or class organizing today, and also what are some opportunities that we have at hand also in relation to. So basically it's navigating this different types of labor versus capital, how they form themselves, how they engage, and so on. So this is my introduction, and I'll immediately pass the word to Leonor, so she can tell us a few things about what she saw. Go ahead, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, and hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation and for organizing. I have to say I feel honored while also challenged by this invitation. And Sina said, but I also wanted to start by saying I am not, nor was before, a unionized worker or part of any union structure, but I'm gonna be a bit more describing what was my experience and some insights I got from the work I did while taking part in the Climate Jobs campaign and the Global Climate Jobs Network. So that's where I am coming from, and this both the campaign and the network did try to engage with unions, union federations, as well as directly with unionized workers. But obviously, and this goes without saying, my knowledge is and experience is limited, but I do find these questions very interesting, and although I'm not going to answer them all, I'm going to do my best to try to bring some interesting insights. So yeah, let's start then. And as Sina already mentioned, we're using this definition, and also the webinar is organized in such a way which already indicates that I'll be talking about a rather small part of the working class, which is the unionized working class, and we know it excludes extensive parts of the working class in the ecofeminist definition we're using. But trade unions have had a very relevant have been very relevant working class militant working class organizations, and they have posed real threats to companies, governments, and to the system as a whole, and hence they have also been subject to repression as any radical organization is, and because of their current as well as their past roles in social movements, I think they're very worth mentioning while we're also discussing what to do and what is to be done. And when discussing working class organizing is obviously relevant to talk about labor unions. Nevertheless, I do fear that a considerable part of active unions today has suffered an enormous and I would argue damaging de-radicalization in both politics and consequentially also in strategy. And from my experience, I did get to understand that a lot of them, as probably a lot of you also are aware, do not have an ambition for system change and much less a system change within our lifetime kind of ambition. And I fear they have become to a big extent agents of dialogue intermediation and conciliation of interests between the workers they represent and the capitalist class via very bureaucratic structures and processes, and I'm gonna come back a bit to this part. So rather than organizing for emancipation and for building social power to radically transform social relationships, they're very much organizing around they're very much organizing to have enough power to negotiate, and this organization is also very much around economic conditions, improvement of economic conditions for workers, such as salaries, working hours, compensations, etc. Whereas we know if we're thinking about an organization organizing workers for class struggle, we must be thinking about much more than that. And a movement which has as an ultimate objective to organize and build power for winning class structure, I think should use, don't want to say like use unions, like use unions as well as use any other kind of organization as organizing and mobilizing tools and structures for agitation and for building social power. And while obviously these different kinds of organizations would engage in different strategies and tactics and would have in different intermediate goals, the point and the goal of the organization should never be to protect itself as an organization and to protect its internal structures and the interests of its staff and employees, but rather to win class struggle, right? And that's is independent on whether we're talking about a left labor union or any other left radical organization. And I think at the moment unions are in a difficult place to achieve that. I'm gonna come a bit to this in a second. So so what do I mean actually? It doesn't mean that unions cannot at this moment still be revolutionary actors and actually engage in system change, but I fear this demands a radical transformation in the framework in which unions are operating. So there's a need for an emergency framing, which entails the capacity to change everything that it's not working, to be agile, to be flexible, to adapt to new organizing contexts, conditions, unexpected opportunities, take new risks, learn fast, and fail differently. And this is a shift I'm afraid a lot of unions won't be able to take forward, and they haven't yet. I think one reason is because of their politics, which, as I mentioned before, has suffered de-radicalization and a shift to the center. There's also the issue on very rigid structures which do not allow for such an agility and adaptation, which is very much necessary in the current moment. But then also in maybe in other cases, because even if they do believe in the need for system change, they don't think they're failing. So this is something the book is also referring to. A lot of times the conversation or what I was told is just like, this is what it's supposed to happen. It just takes time. You have to, it is an ongoing struggle, blah, 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 but they don't actually see it as a failure and as their failure and as their task to change everything or change what needs to be changed. And obviously, like a lot of trade unions are not looking at climate as a working class issue, and also don't understand or at least take forward what the climate crisis means in terms of deadlines and what it means in terms of international class struggle. And this brings me to also what I think it's an important point, which is concerning precisely the question about internationalism and international solidarity, not as a flag, but as a task. And so, as we know, this entails international coordination, international organizing, and the allocation of a considerable amount of internal resources and capacity to build that. Yeah, and I think this is not happening to the extent it should within the organized labor movement, the trade union movement. The book also makes a very important statement, which I'm going to quote, and goes like, the fact that capital is globally organized while the working class is fragmented is our problem to solve. And when we're talking about the unionized working class, I think we can think actually about different kinds of fragmentations, or it made me think about different kinds of fragmentations. One is obviously, if we're talking about unions, the fragmentation by sector, which can be useful because you can create more leverage if you're organizing different sectors and connecting with the concrete material needs under different contexts of the different sectors. But you have to use that fragmentation well, and otherwise you're actually creating like a fragmentation within the working class and a division between the working class, which I think has happened. So that would be one. I think another, maybe I can really call it a fragmentation, but something I also thought about in regards to this sentence when thinking about labor unions is that, in my perception, they're very disconnected from the grassroots. And in some cases, they're even antagonistic to them. And obviously, this hinders a lot of possibility for consequential coordination, cooperation, and articulation, and for ultimately building social power for radical change. And I believe that there are structural restrictions by the unionized labor movement for actual movement level thinking and movement level organizing. And I think this is a problem, and I think it is a symptom of a lack of ambition and or a lack of correct is not the right word, but a lack of let's go with correct because I don't remember another one. Correct political analysis of the threats the working class is under, right? Because if you understand the challenges we have ahead, then you want to build a movement. I'm gonna wrap it up. You want to build. You want to organize at a movement level, international movement level, and you want to organize with everyone who wants to organize with you because you're under tight deadlines, and the task is immense. So I think, yeah, that's another problem. And then we have the division and fragmentation related to internationalism and the lack of actually like international coordination. And the book also says that the labor movement is probably still the biggest organized force in the world, but has the moment in which there is like congresses or confederations have very little mandates or mandate to just decide on not very substantial things. And because I'm being told to wrap up, I wanted to still talk about material conditions by the climate crisis to organize, but let's keep that for later. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Leonor. I'll pass on to Sergio, who is a unionist, but coming from a different sector of people who may have their own formal challenges and also practical challenges to unionizing. So I'll just leave the word to you, Sergio.
Thank you, Sinan. So thank you, Leonor, for the nice talk. I can connect to some points there. And hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Honored to be able to speak here. Also surprised. Happy for the invitation. And just to make it a little bit more concrete, the Free Workers Union is an anarcho-syndicalist trade union in Germany. It's not immensely huge. We were talking about a few thousand people organized throughout Germany in this. It's still one of the biggest federated anarchist groups in Germany. And we actually are almost strongly the opposite of what Leonor was kind of describing. Like our union understands itself as revolutionary. We do want systems change. That is the goal that we are moving for. We do want to increase our power as class. We have all these revolutionary aims behind us. But for example, we do not pay any of us. All of us are doing voluntary work completely. All of us are doing this in our free time in different forms and different ways of kind of managing that. And this is why we kind of take the trade union case, or we are best at taking the trade union cases that the big unions don't take. For example, Verdi would not go, doesn't a lot of times go on the field to talk to Romanian migrant workers or to Bulgarian or Polish workers, because on one level that would mean how would they get the fees for the workers each month? Because these people are not so stable and they only work for 3 months a year. Then they would have to pay translators, which would cost them 200 euros a day. This would not be, they would not be able to support this financially. So they are not taking these situations, but we as a union that are working on voluntary work, we can take these things and we can win them. And we also usually take cases which are inside of, where also kind of the bigger unions are not, as you said, Leonor, agile enough in order to take them. For example, in the new platform economy, like gorilla drivers, people who are transporting food and restaurants and things, they are organized in a very completely different way. They don't even have a center that they can meet and talk to each other. So when we are organizing them, we have to get jobs in these places, and then talk to workers that we might meet on the way or might meet when we are going to the depot of where they are organizing, and then decide to have a community meet and drink a beer together so that we can discuss about the work. So you need commitment, you need to think different, you need to, and this is kind of the strength of this kind of like style of organizing, that you are agile, you are always kind of like pretty open to try things out and to test things out. But there was also kind of like difficulties in this kind of organizing. People, it's very hard to keep like a good group culture of people not burning out and doing this type of work. It's hard to coordinate learnings from each other and kind of like do all of this, and all the typical kind of like problems that you can imagine can appear from this type of organizing, but it's a continuous learning process and a continuous development process. So yeah, shortly, this was about the FAU. This is where I'm part of, and this is where I take most of my learnings. So I just want to make this clear and transparent that my big experience is working with Romanian migrant workers in this context. And I think some of the things that I've been learning doing this might be able to translate to other sectors. And I'm thinking I'm talking to basically to activists, to people like you who are kind of wanting to change this system, wanting to are kind of already conscious of the problems of capitalism, are kind of conscious of the mechanism of how it functions, and are looking for strategies and a way of solving this. So I'm talking a little bit in this direction, kind of assuming this is what you're interested in. And what I would say to you then, what I think I can give on one level is, I know there is often a disconnection between the activists who usually come from middle class, more educated backgrounds, and the precariat, which is the social side, and the people who are really basically working for day-to-day, month-to-month existential survival reasons. They don't have a place for flexibility and playing. This is something a lot of the times there is also this assumption that they do not care about the climate, but it is the thing that their existential situation is next month. If they do not manage this month, next month their children might be on the street. So that is a kind of like a bigger concern for them, but it doesn't mean that that is not happening. Actually, I just make a small story of my grandmother lives in the countryside, and she's also a farmer in Romania. And she's good friends with her neighbor. I go with her to her neighbor to visit, and the neighbor she's 80 years old, I think. Yeah, 80. Her daughter is 60. Her daughter comes in and she tells us about what's been happening, and kind of like the pollution that's been happening with the plastic, and talking shortly about the fact that the winter is not coming so often. And the grandmother is just like, yeah, but why is the winter just like changing? This has not happened in my life. And the daughter starts to explain how this is connected to the pollution, how this is connected to the way the system works, and also how this is connected to capital, to making profits in a very simple way. And the grandmother, 80 years old, just goes and like, yeah, that makes sense. We shouldn't let them do this. It's very, very basic, very simple. And she has a connection with nature. She understands this. She understands the importance of this. So I would not say that these people don't see an importance of the ecological question. It's just that the material question stands first in a lot of situations. So this is again a generalization. This is not true for everyone. I'm just kind of mentioning that it's a problem of taking seriously the material concerns of them. Now, what I would want to say about kind of like the precariat, just the situation is also, again, just to point one thing which might not be super obvious in kind of the working of capitalism is, for example, Romania has gone through what was called in the 90s, after the fall of kind of dictatorial communism, has gone to a system called turbo capitalism, which is a very rapid onset of neoliberalism. And in this process, a lot of services have been cut. A lot of kind of like finances have been invested in major cities. Rural areas have been strongly disconsidered there. There have been no investments. Schools have been massively underfunded. A lot of schools had to close down. There are no working opportunities. So these people already from the 90s have started to migrate very powerfully. Romania has, I think, in the world, after the warring countries, you can correct me, Irina, if I'm wrong here, I think the highest immigration rate, with 25% of the country, with I think it's from 24 million people, 8 million people have emigrated, either working and coming back or have moved to there. And through this, you have a lot of this immigration is based on economic reasons, and is based on dissatisfaction with the political system. And I just wanted to make clear here that what is happening also in this kind of migration, in this kind of work migration, is that a lot of these people are facing disastrous working conditions, I would say. Like even they see it as almost a form of slavery. Like you are talking about things which are happening a lot in the legal terms. This is also one of the reasons that why we as the FAO can win a lot of fights actually, is because workers taking in migrant workers tend to profit from their lack of knowledge of their rights, tend to profit from their fear, tend to profit from their experience of powerlessness, and the bosses do a lot of basically illegal working condition things, like working 7 days a week, over 12 hours a day, not even having more than 6 hours to sleep. So things like this are happening on a constant basis. And when we get kind of contacted from workers, sometimes it's just enough to be like, hey, we know what shit you're doing. We have proof of how you're doing it. We've talked to most of your workers already. And if we go to the state with this, they're gonna fine you brutally. And if we don't go to the state with this, we are going to sabotage you constantly, and it will be awful for you. And this is usually, these threats are already enough to get them to be scared and to just pay everybody correctly and to even wrap their game up for at least a year. So this is because, yeah, I'm trying to wrap it up. Thank you. I would just say one thing to kind of close this in. I'm saying these things and I don't want to kind of like scare you. I just want to say there are also things that are happening which are also pretty interesting here, which are kind of happening as solutions to this. I'm just going to name one. In Austria, there was, because also of neoliberal privatization of the care sector and of the hospital sector, old people and people with psychological diseases were not being cared for by the state and by social services anymore. So this was being privatized, usually by migrant labor, migrant care labor, which also mostly women. Coming there from the 90s on, doing 24/7 work, care work with these people in illegal frames, basically, until the 2000s. Now, in 2007, the state in Austria decided to legalize this type of work. 24/7 care work paid under €3 an hour, legalized it as some form of freelance work, which is complete and utter bullshit. And then, and this went on for like several years until women care workers in Austria started to organize together, not in trade unions, but as an association, and started to meet for their rights. And Serbian care workers were doing the same thing, and Bulgarian care worker women were doing the same thing, and they decided to create a meta organization that is fighting for migrant care worker rights in Austria, which is called AG24. And they've done amazing work in bringing them together, making support communities for each other, attacking court laws on this. So you have the potential of migrant workers organizing transnationally across borders from the precariat on. These things are happening, and this is just one example. So I'm just wanting to say there is a lot of difficulty in organizing the precariat, but there are also a lot. AG24. I will share your link. Yeah, there are also a lot of examples, and we can go also longer on the difficulties and the chances that stay in organizing this sector and this social strata. But I will pass it on. Thank you also for.
Thanks a lot, Sergio. Now that we get the sense of this part of the equation, I'll just immediately pass to Irina, so she may want to contribute with her perspective and with her whatever she has seen in her experience. Irina, would you like to?
Hello, can you hear me well? Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here, and very interesting to hear your thoughts about what can be called activism for climate justice, or more than that. I'm also a bit, I must say, a bit intimidated by by the title. I want to go back a little bit to why we are talking about this, whether solutions or problems. I'm trying to understand why are we talking about class against class. That's one. And why are we talking about all in? So I didn't prepare something specific. I have popcorn in my head, like a lot of things to talk and to think about. But just to kind of provoke you, I would say that it's a bit, I mean, I felt that it's a bit of like a contradiction if we are trying to talk about what you described in the description of the webinar, to kind of figure out who are the how did you say, with the grave diggers, and then let's say who has the historical kind of agency to create, let's say, to reinvent the revolution, let's say. This is how I interpreted your provocative topic. So all in a sense, it would mean that there is no point in discussing about the historical agents, no? So I'm starting with this kind of provocation of seeing a bit of a contradiction, which actually it's not necessarily a contradiction, but it's a contradiction in the sense that the whole, from what I've known, let's say theoretically, the whole history of political ideas about how to change the world and how to create, let's say, a radical transformation is exactly about the political subject, no? I don't consider myself a typical ecofeminist. And when I say this, it doesn't mean that I disagree with ecofeminism. My work has been a way to kind of move beyond exactly this obsession, what I see as an obsession, to define the historical agent, the specific, let's say, virtues or merits of those who are supposed to bring up the change. And because I position myself somewhere in between, or at least I've also been an activist, so I'm kind of a scholar activist, I've always been ambivalent about choosing a certain mission for those who have been involved in movements, because my experience with movements has been precisely that you have a very heterogeneous kind of group in general. Any movement has this. Whether we are talking about workers, let's say, or we are talking about ecologists, because the conflict that I mostly worked on involves precisely, miners or former miners that have been in the same time peasants, that have been in the same time migrants, that have been in the same time women or different ethnicities. So you have all these intersectionalities that are extremely important in defining what the political subject is. So when you start with this quite obvious kind of, even if you are not an activist, it's an obvious kind of understanding of what the political subject is, you are confronted with the need to accept that what may be perceived for somebody who has a very clear mission as not having the ambition for change, like Leonor put it, and I would say the same thing 20 years ago when I was involved in the Roșia Montana movement. Unfortunately, I think it's a bit of a frustration to handle as part of the activist work. So this was my introduction to what would mean actually ecofeminist from my point of view, because we can start from the assumption that there are some people on the one hand, let's say more middle class, more educated, more white, who know exactly what the mission should be about, and they go somewhere where usually people are lacking this kind of consciousness, And the mission of the first group is to educate the people in this direction of, let's say, class consciousness. But I think the first step as members of any movement or any kind of group or community organizer should do is to at least give more work, pay more attention or do more about the actual care work for what can be considered consciousness in itself, first of all, and second, what can be considered care, no? Because one of the problems that I have, including with ecofeminism, not to mention that feminism is also a big controversy in itself. My problem is that it assumes, again, a certain subject, no, a political subject that somehow is assumed to know how to care. And you observe this many times, no? An ecofeminist is somebody who, no, or earth care. And this is something that I agree, you know, to a certain extent, you have these groups of people who have been contributing, consciously or not, because sometimes they have been doing this as part of their, let's say, what is considered a natural kind of condition, but it doesn't mean that they were okay with the fact that, you know, from generation to generation, they have been peasants and they have been simply contributing to the reproduction of seas, the reproduction of land, taking care in a very, you know, basics kind of subsistence, unproductive labor, unpaid, unrecognized, and it's somehow, you know, normalized as some sort of natural work, but there is a lot of ambivalence, including for the person who is the caregiver. So we should actually problematize whether care itself or giving care it's such an easy virtue, no? Even when you are actually willing to do it. What is happening at many times, you are actually forced to a position of doing this down, which also means a kind of being pinned down to certain subject positions that most of the times are not necessarily your choice. For example, from a gender perspective, it's much more important to realize that whatever forms of identification, including the virtuous forms of identifications like caregiver, should be problematized, and first really, you know, working with consciousness and giving care for your own political subjectification, let's say, means that you ask yourself whether your identity, even if you assume it, is actually an identity that that doesn't oppress you. And so that can be also a question that activists themselves should ask themselves among themselves when they are doing group. This is how I think, you know, this is my opinion. I'm not giving any advice because I think that's a very, very difficult work to do. But where I want to talk about is precisely the fact that we can discuss the virtues of those unrecognized and unpaid subjects that are doing the reproductive labor or the earth care labor, like my friend Stefania Barca is writing about. And I have a lot of debates with her also about this. But it doesn't mean that I'm not embracing these important observations. So, for example, I recently published something that I call trying to think about the fact that a lot of us in these movements are talking about what would mean to become a more eco citizen, no? Like everybody wants us to become more eco citizens, but we forget, for example, that a lot of the eco citizens, without being calling themselves eco citizens, are the so-called agrarian citizens. You have eco-agrarian citizens. You have those taken for granted peasants who have been doing this cooling down of the earth, the way the virtue goes. But in the same time, it's not enough to proclaim. So we are trying to emphasize, it's a good thing, we are trying to emphasize the fact that there are people out there who are forgotten, and they're contributing already. They're doing the climate jobs that you are asking for. Yeah, I'm trying to finish. So there are already categories and groups out there that are not even recognized within climate justice movements, maybe sometimes, and they are doing already these, let's say, climate jobs that are not recognized. So this could be part of also the mission to at least become more solidary in this intersectional kind of perspective. So, for example, agrarian movements cannot afford, let's say, the losing this struggle in the face of agro business, and the only way it can survive is by becoming what some people would call via campesina kind of movement. So they necessarily have to be translocal and intersectional. So I will leave it here, and we can discuss more.
Thank you very much, all of you. These were all very different angles. I mean, you're also coming from different places, and we were specifically invited to do that. I'm really excited. I just want to start by recognizing some very basic, obvious statement that somebody told me very recently, just a couple of years ago, and I was really ashamed of myself for not having realized it, which is the very simple information that everywhere where there are humans, there's organization. And everywhere where there is injustice, there is resistance. This is happening, this is taking different forms, and sometimes the forms that it takes, the organization or the resistance, are forms that we are not familiar with. They may be implicit, they may be invisible, and in other cases that are not exactly what we would expect it to look like or something. But these are like kind of basic human reaction to, yeah, when people come together, they organize, and they may be organizing in ways that are we may agree with, that we may like, that we may expect. And when they resist, also they may be resisting in ways that we might not expect to happen that way. So this is one thing I wanted to say, because you are all referring to this process of what in some other conversations Sergio was talking about, like the radicalization or politicization pipeline, as in like people as they work, each one of us, right? This is also, I'm not talking about some other people, I'm also talking about myself. Like as I face a problem, I go further to the roots of it. So I want to leave it as here, and I would like to give us the, let's say, the table, the virtual table, to see if you wanted to say something else about this process of, and also I think it's really curious what Irina was saying, because it actually somehow talks to what we heard from Leonor and Sergio in terms of workers, which we recognize as workers, which might not want to be those workers in those situations, which is also what Sergio was saying in a way, right? So workers not necessarily as a self-affirming position, but as in the social relation in which people are, and not just, this is not to deny the work. The work is there, but many times it's imposed. I mean, in capitalism it's imposed, but also even when we're talking about other kinds of work, it might be socially imposed. So in this dynamic of I think this is also interesting in terms of what Leonor was saying, because in many cases we are talking about work that is not socially useful, but somehow is still there, and a lot of people are depending on it, and a lot of communities are depending on it. So understanding this dynamic of like getting conscious of the work that is happening, at the same time rejecting it, but also having this urge, like let's say, to be useful to community in general, right? So there's this whole, because I mean work exists, it's labor exists, people are doing it. The way it's distributed is confusing. The way it's defined is also very problematic in many cases, which is what Leonor was talking when we were talking about like specifically climate related stuff. So I wanted to ask you, any of the three of you, if you wanted to reflect a little bit about this process of politicization, like what you see, how this is happening. When I say politicization in terms of like labor, the people relating to their own labor conditions, but also in relation to their, let's say, class relations, and how, yeah, I just wanted to say, I wanted to give you just a bit more time to say anything about these things if you want to, because I am aware that we are being very tight. And after this round, and if you want to ask other things to each other also as speakers, you can also do that. And then we will open for questions. Would anybody like to say something about this? Sergio, go ahead.
I could add one thing. So for example, when I talk to workers, I basically never mention that we are an anarchist organization because I know that this is what they don't know where to start with this. It would completely confuse them. It would, and my work, my first work is to establish trust. Because a lot of the times the people that I work with, the people that have problems, the first problem that I have is that they do not trust that I am here to actually offer mutual aid, to actually be, hey, I want to solve this together because I also hate bosses and I also think this is shit and I also want us to have a network of more power. And they at first, they do not trust me because they have never been helped in their life without interest. They have never been supported by someone from an organization who does not want something from them. And that is even a problem of trust. So this is a first hurdle that I have to go through. And I do, and we have ways of dealing with this. And for example, I even tell them I tell them, okay, I help you if you help other people as well. If you stay part of this and you stay with us and you help the other person who has the same problem as you have, that me requesting something from them actually creates a trust because they understand what I want from them. And this is a form of politicization, but I do not mention, okay, I don't come to them with anarchism, I don't come to them with capitalism. And they do have big, we don't have time for these lessons and they wouldn't be interested in them at first. But they do have an understanding of a root of a problem. They tell me, if I ask questions about like, why is it like this? It's the boss. And why is he doing this? Because he wants more money, because he gets more profit, because there's the greed. And these are the things that they do understand the root causes of this systematic. They don't have a complex theoretical analysis of capitalism, but they do get where it's coming from. So, and what's happening also at the same time for them, what their experience is they are constantly disillusioned with, for example, Western capitalism, kind of selling itself, at least for Romania, and this kind of like the place of milk and honey, where everything is working great, where you have great working conditions, and the state is amazing. And they come here and they get disillusioned very powerfully. And the far right is very good at taking that disillusionment, taking those emotions of frustration, and narrativizing it in the sense of like, it's the West that is problematic with all these progressive movements, and kind of translating that into their narrative. And even the far right is using a lot of leftist language and talking about the bad multinational companies and stuff like this. So they are using these theories to move and shift towards kind of like BRICS geopolitical position, to shift towards far right extremism and all these things, and also the hate propaganda. But this is also for us, I feel, kind of like the major point of intervention and talking, and this is how the difficult aspect, as Irina was saying. I don't want to come there and be an educator and be like, hey, I have the right position, I have the right class consciousness. Let me just impart you from my awesome position of knowledge and give you here a little bit of this class consciousness. I think this is a very problematic position and very wrong one. But what I think needs to happen, and I really think that because capitalists have so much control of the media, a lot of our narratives don't come there. One way that sociologists talk about who do you trust and who do you learn from is from the people that you are actively engaged with the people that you are friends with the people that you support each other with. These are the people that you start to model unconscious. These are the people that you are engaged with, and these are the kind of like openings you have. And what I am experiencing, I do not think that just kind of like, okay, I'm trying to wrap it up, Sinan, just at one point to wrap this idea up. One of the main problems that I'm facing with as an anarcho-syndicalist trade union organizer is the fact that a lot of times we manage to solve issues. We manage to get people their money back. We manage to even to even organize some workers and even impart knowledge on how to organize further and how to kind of deal with their own problems in the future. But a lot of times I do not see this translating, and I do not see myself creating a culture of solidarity among them. I don't see them supporting each other in mutual aid after this case is solved. So I'm constantly thinking of how to do this and how to achieve this more and more. And I think it's super important that in the process of supporting some of us supporting each other in our very basic material interests, and right now with the middle class even becoming more and more precarious, this will be more and more a problem. But I think if we support each other in this process of supporting each other, if we manage to teach each other the capacities that are needed for this, and we manage to teach each other to, you start at self-interest, but to teach each other how we are connected, to expand our range of concern, and to really live prefiguratively another culture, it can slowly change. This cultural shift is so important. And I'm seeing this sometimes happening with workers. I'm seeing it in them just adopting different positions, just asking different questions, being much more open to be curious about not only their own interests, but these things are already inside of us. The values are already there. And it's just a question for me of activating that and creating processes that actually don't just solve issues, but actually think about this cultural shift at the same time. I don't know how specific I am. I'm trying to really put it more specifically later, but I would pass it on right now. Yeah. I hope I was clear, at least.
Well, I mean, you clearly opened like 5 pathways. It was clear the 5 pathways in front of us. I don't know if Leonor or Irina would like to pick any one of them and take a few steps. Leonor,
Irina,
go ahead.
if you want to go, I'm kind of like, yeah, making there's lots of stuff going on here. I'm trying to think what is most relevant to mention. So if you want to take if you
Irina,
have
would you
something
like
ready, you can
to-
go.
Would you like to reflect?
Yeah, I just want to say that I fully agree with everything that Sergio said. And I am reminded of similar situations, and maybe not so intense, let's say, because I've been somewhat involved more like less like an organizer, but more like a, let's say, supporter or sympathizers of peasant organization. But I do remember situations when there was this blockage of, or it felt like we are parallel communicating, no? Like you said, I wanted to say something and I was taken somewhere else. And this is actually, I think for me, this is more interesting to discuss than anything else. Like Sergio said, this is more about how to create a relation, no? How to create a relation, and obviously the first thing is how to create trust. And I do believe that this in itself is a type of reproductive labor, if you want to put it in the context of a movement or whatever community organization you're trying to do. And obviously this is the reason why people are exhausted, because they are trying to save someone outside, but there is always like, you save the planet, you save something else, but like actually you need to like first create this movement in itself, which already is a lot of work. So what I see in most of the movements or the organization is that they don't give time to the exactly most important thing that is necessary in order to do the other saving. This is for me the most this is probably why I'm writing about, like, we need to, like, because I'm confronted with this not only with associations, which at least talk much more to each other. But if you look at the scholarship related to commons or commoning, which is a lot about, this kind of work, but as if you have some sort of formula, and then you apply a formula and boom, you have a movement or you have a commoning situation. It's actually, the whole point of creating these rules is because there is so much uncertainty and there is so much, lack of knowledge about the other or about ourselves in a relation, that commoning is still a secret. No, how do you do this commoning thing? No, movement making or commoning, it's really the most difficult work to do. No. So, I mean, this question, if you want to simplify it, I'm trying to simplify it really, to take it out of the already existent kind of recipes of institutional or bureaucratic or party and obviously the feminists, the ecofeminists are the closest, let's say, to what I would say a very intimate sphere of commoning. Because in the end, when we talk about trust and relationships, we are talking about very intimate. I'm not saying romantic intimate. I'm saying the nucleus of our relations to ourselves and to the others. And if you look at also again this, just the scholarship, but also other, what is missing is also looking at what Sergio discusses as lack of trust. But if you want, not only dealing on how to create, the joy or the harmony of caring for each other. Let's have reciprocity, like we are all like selling these good values, not the virtues of commoners. But we forget that you can never be just your best, and you are also confronted with your worst, and you have very, very many negative, let's say, emotions. But I'm not just talking about emotions, but you have a lot of difficulties to relate to, even to yourself. So that's a very intimate way of looking at how, like, the micro universe, if you want, of building a movement. And I don't see anybody doing that from all the groups and all the different groups that I've seen. I am still looking for that group that puts enough effort to actually listening and raising their consciousness to each other. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, speaking of class, I actually want to say that I am a bit worried that there is this, okay, so what is a worker? Like you said, you have this ambivalence about what workers is. It doesn't matter what kind of work they are doing, and it's very hard to talk about, their common interests like workers. But I think it's very important because the theory tells us that workers are united by actually one universal thing. No, first of all, what unites them is that they don't have property. This is essential. So the lack of property usually is the most typical way of creating the solidarity. But you can do more than that, because maybe some of them, are more bourgeois and they do have some land and property, but they don't have a job, or they are unemployed, or the commonalities of these workers is much more important than what kind of work they are doing. No. So in that sense, that's, let's say, universal about whatever proletariat you're talking about. But then the other thing that they have in common is precisely what theoreticians discuss as being a non-class. So they are not just a class. They are a non-class in the sense that they will always be the anonymous. They will always be the ones who are excluded from the political consensus. This is what if you want, the most universal and the most common thing that puts them together is the fact that they will always be the anonymous and excluded. The three nothings, if you want: the no jobs, no social security, no land, the dispossessed. So this is what is important if you want for more consciousness. This is what I wanted to emphasize.
Thank you very much. Now that we have another 20 minutes maybe for this session, And I'm conscious that in some places where people are coming from, it may be very late. So I just wanted to give some space for people to also, who are in the session, to contribute, ask questions. I am aware that there was some chat going on for practical purposes, but this is also maybe a point where you may ask questions to the speakers or reflect on what was said. So I'll give some time. If you want to raise a hand, you can do that. If you want to write in the chat, you can also do that. I would read it out, so that it's also registered, and our folks could then react or address them. As people are writing or thinking, I'll just read out one comment in the chat already, which is with Sergio, cites from All In, of course. Joe Burns's book, Class Struggle Unionism, talks about this problem of going beyond immediate workplace concerns toward broader class consciousness and solidarity. And yeah, there is this whole issue of, normalizing a culture of solidarity, right? That is, I think, one of the main threads that Sergio was raising. Are there any other questions in the room? Brittany, go ahead.
Yes, and thank you, dears, for bringing all your wisdom. I was reflecting on, because I'm active in Spain, and here the biggest workers unions, I think like everywhere else, no, they are completely hijacked by the system. And what is really like bringing the front in social movement fighting are the tenant unions. So this hybrid between a union and a social movement that also manages to get the working class together, but instead of based on their work, like based on how they like have horrible living conditions, like evictions, the rent increasing, and so on. So like instead of like the boss, would you have like the landlord, no, and the whole rentist system. And I was wondering, like from your experience and in your countries, if you have seen these kind of initiatives where we apply the organizing techniques to social struggles that then can get politicized to a level, no, as Sergio was saying, that the people do understand, no, and the people in, like, thanks to the work of the tenant unions, the people do see that the government is taking a big role supporting the landlords, no, and then you cannot see how the whole capitalist system is built on politics and so on. So it's like a very good eye opener. And I was wondering if, yeah, like if you have given thought to these other pathways, and if there are also other like burning fights in Germany, for example, in Romania or in Portugal. Yeah, I'm very interested about that.
Are there any other questions in the room? Thanks for this. Before giving word to our speakers, maybe I'll give some more time of silence for other people to chip in. If not, oh, there's another comment, so I'll read it out. Irina, great point about the challenges of connecting oneself and others and the importance of care work. I heard good things about the UX training center. Maybe it goes in that direction. We are a little, myself and Sergio are a little suspect on this because we are both involved in the UX project in one form or another very closely. So I'm just gonna leave this comment as is without saying anything else. Leonor, you were kind of thinking through and kind of coming up with what, if you wanted to reflect on anything. I just want to give you some space if you have something to share, either about what Brittany said, but also about what was said before.
Yeah,
Keep the
so
space.
on the tenants unions, so I don't have any like direct experience or actually much knowledge. I do know that, like, for example, in cases such as in Ireland, in Dublin more specifically, yeah, there were strong tenants unions. I don't know to which extent there was a wider politicization process happening, because I can imagine, like, or also from what I know, like at some point they were really entangled in like how hard the housing crisis was in Dublin, but I think it's an interesting case where to look at. I actually got to know them in a conference around Green New Deals. So I think they were also involved in that conversation somehow, and that's maybe something they were trying to like bring to the wider organizing and the work they did with the communities. And yeah, and I think like just something that I was thinking before, and I think might be quite obvious, but maybe not so much, but now it connects to this case, because I know the people organizing the tenants union, for example, in Dublin, the ones I met, they were all volunteers, right? And that's the case like Sergio was describing, as also in comparison to what I was referring to, because well, my experience is unfortunately much more on dealing with union leaders rather than directly with the workers, and that's quite like that changes a lot, with like the kind of work that you're doing, but yeah, it changes a lot also, like the entire like conversation, and so like what I, for example, was describing as like not like when talking about ambition, etc., like I'm often referring to like union organizers, union leaders, or like how you want to call them, which are like paid workers, like staff, union staff, most of the times, and that changes like like when we're talking about like the politicizing process, I think like there's like the more institutionalized where there's actually like nothing against hierarchy in the sense of like that you can have people which are more like have more responsibility, have more tasks, whatever, but when organizing the class becomes kind of like a job you get paid to, and you're part of an organization whose objective somehow is to also like keep going because you want like the jobs to also like stay, and versus like when what you're describing, Sergio, or on like you're actually there because you are in class, like class solidarity, and like the class struggle by itself is is why you're there. That's why like the relationships behind them, as like also Irina was talking about, from what I understand, are much more politicizing in itself, right? And so like yeah, this issue on ambitious, and I think we must, I also don't want to, I think we must be ambitious in all the organizing work that we're doing, because we're in a moment which asks that from us, and I think we should bring that ambition and that honesty in like all the organizing spaces in which we are, whether we're organizing like the housing movements, or we're organizing like precarious workers. I think this like yeah, how you're viewing your task is very much influencing how you're also politicizing those around you in the process. And I think like that's something that occurred to me, and I feel it's relevant. I think like often the relationships I observed with like within the trade unions and like trade union organizers and trade union leaders, which often were staff, were somehow depoliticizing, like, and whereas like it should be the opposite, no, like they should be part of the politicizing process of the workers they are representing. Yeah. And I've just seen someone reacted to what I said on the Community Action Tenants Union in Ireland. It's pretty exciting and has started professionalizing a bit with membership dues, and obviously like getting folks to organize it while getting like paid. That's great, as long as you don't become like yeah, like a kind of ONG, NGO kind of structure where like that's the whole point, is just to keep on getting paid, I would say. Yeah, so just some thoughts on this. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I'll also read another comment, which can give us our final round of reflections from our speakers. So the comment goes, the examples like USB in Italy, NUMSA in South Africa, and Umutsen in Turkey, these examples still show how trade unions can politicize. So how do speakers evaluate those kind of examples? So it comes from a place of, if you forget double layers of class formation, one on the spontaneous and one on the political level, if you forget these double layers, then we cannot transform working class into a revolutionary agent. So carrying class consciousness from outside of working place is still valid for that. And we should count on the most consciousness parts of the working class to develop revolutionary strategies. So this is a comment coming from the chat. And I'll leave the floor. I guess I would like to give just a couple of minutes. I know this is a lot, and I mean, in general, the topic is too heavy to have a session like this. But I'll just like to give a couple of minutes to each of the speakers to round up. I don't know where to start from. Maybe Irina, would you like to say a couple of things, and then we move on to Sergio, and then eventually Leonor? Does that make sense?
I can try, since I really need to go where I am. It's quite late. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that has been said, and I'm not very well informed about trade unions, and I usually look for workers and consciousness in groups that are related to more to, let's say, what Sergio at some point described about his grandmother is described in the literature as environmentalism of the poor. So those peasants or people who somewhat depend on the land, and they are either in danger of losing their land or their forests or their seeds. For me, these are, let's say, informal workers, or workers that are not even recognized as workers, and they are certainly most of the time not part of any union. So I'm more interested in this kind of groups, and I think this is also part of the feminists to change a little bit the topic of working class from wage labor to non-wage labor, and this is important to remember also. But of course, this doesn't mean that one excludes the other, obviously. As a conclusion, if you want, yeah, I mean, for me, this is important to do this kind of work of solidarity making and trust making in a way that emphasizes in any group all the two, what I would say, there are the two key components of what would make this time of emancipatory politics truly progressive, and that is being, let's say, global or translocal, and by this meaning that they do look at globalization as something important, but in an alter globalization kind of sense, because it's also very important to counteract the more populist far-right co-option of, let's say, the anti-globalized and anti-corporate discourse. So this is very important, like Sergio also emphasized. And the second component that I would think is essential for this kind of organizing is to look at intersectionality, because most of the time these kind of movements are still dominated by educated, middle class, younger, white, and so making really more effort to realize that even within, let's say, a village that is against mining, you have intersectional positions that you need to approach, and that's also a very difficult task sometimes. So these are my final words, and I'm sorry I need to withdraw, but it was really nice hearing everybody, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina. Sergio, would you like to say something?
Yes. And by and thank you for the really nice points, and I'm trying to like maybe connect a few of the questions that have been asked also from Vinny, and also to a little bit make clear my position. I came here talking a little more from the perspective and talking about the experiences with working with the precariat, with this social strata, working with people in the working class. But in the question of like what is our revolutionary agent, I think we have multiple very faceted agents, and there are for example, tenant unions are very strong. For example, in Czech, it's one of the strongest politicizing organizations that are happening right now, and in other parts of Eastern Europe as well. Not so much in Romania because of like how the housing market is organized there, but I do see that all these different types of organizing are creating the conditions necessary for what you describe in the book, all in for having this bigger social change. And I always have to think also, to be honest, about there is this kind of like very typical organizing momentum that heuristic that you have in a working space. Who do you talk to first as an organizer? Who are the first person that you first connect? And who is the person that you last connect with? And the first person that you connect with is the ones who are already on your side. Is the ones that is the workers who already have a certain class conscience, who already see the problem as you see. You don't need to put so much effort in organizing because they will directly be your closest supporters, and you can from there on work with them. So from taking this position, I do think that the first people that we need to organize with better is actually already the activists, the people who are already implicated in these eco-socialist movements and these eco-feminist movements, and they really take the position of, as Irina said, really embody the values that we're talking about, really embody this care and really prefigurate it, and through this also be able to mutually support each other, show for the people of the precariat that we have mutual aid networks that can support each other in conditions of problem, that can support our material interest needs, and this will gain their trust, and also show them, because a lot of them, for example, very classically in Romania, these workers do not trust the unions because the unions have been very corrupt, have not been there for their interest, so they come with a doubt. So this is why when we meet with these people, we have to already be able to embody these qualities, not be authoritarian, not come from above, not come with arrogance, be able to respect these material interests, and then we have a chance of speaking to them. And also the last thing, may have one capacity to add one last thing, because I see at least that you raised your hand, and I want to go for that. Just wanting to say also to what Dara said, that I think also very many trade unions are doing very good politicizing work. I'm not a fan of thinking just anarchist syndicalist unions are the only ones doing it. No, there are a lot of really amazing radical unions all around the world. I support this strongly. And I think one thing that we also want to add is, please do not romanticize the precariat in the working class. They are people there because of the harsh conditions, because of this culture of hyper individualism that they catch on. You meet very, very hateful positions. You meet a lot of kind of like lack of tolerance. You meet like very strongly inner capitalists in themselves. And so I think for that, we really have to accept that we are all flawed. We are all learning through this process. And we have to have the capacity to tolerate and to talk and to work together and to learn from each other, and not come from a position of arrogance. And that's the only way that you can actually really meet with these people on an eye level. And I think that is the most kind of like important thing, having, I don't know, imagine 10 uh, um, very educated activists in their plenum talking very organized by each other, and then having 10 workers that have never been in this type of situation. And you need to have this capacity to tolerate and to work with each other. And that's the thing that I think we really need to learn, is to listen to each other, to embody these values and accept that we're in this learning process with each other. And I think that can have the best chance of crossing these divides in order to unite as a class. That would be my last closing position. Sorry for making it a little bit longer. I'm open.
Sergio, I would like to first pass the word to Leonor for if she wanted to add something, and then if people are still available, we can do another round of questions. Leonor, go ahead.
Yeah,
Please,
thank you.
couple of minutes.
Okay, yeah. So thanks, Leonor, for your question. I have to say I don't. When I was presenting, if it was not clear, I was coming from a very Eurocentric experience, but I am aware that there are very militant trade unions probably also in Europe, as like you mentioned, this one from Italy. We were never successful in engaging with Italian trade unions within the framing of the Global Climate Jobs Network, so I wouldn't be able to say, but I know like in South Africa as well as in other places there are militant trade unions who for sure are politicizing. So yeah, for sure. But and not directly related, I also kind of actually wanted to like make this, because sometimes like when we're talking about organizing the working class, I had exactly the same point as Sergio on like we're romanticizing like people as like it's also like not us that we're talking about, but also like as in like obviously while recognizing like the differences that exist and are very important to be recognized within the international working class, we often as like organizers, activists, whatever you consider yourself or you want to call yourself, we're kind of like even externalizing the working class as we don't belong there, while also romanticizing it. And it's kind of like, and this idea of like we ought to organize the working class as a very romantical idea. I was like often confronted with that in regards directly with like trade unions, and like we need the trade unions because the trade unions are like the working class organizations, and we like they are the revolutionary actors, and this was often brought up to me in a very like romantic way. Yeah, and just kind of like wanted also to bring the awareness to that. And then Sinan had posed a question which I don't recall exactly what it was, but I just also to wrap up everything that I wanted to say, I think like for me it feels important to also finish this conversation with I think a key part of this like politicizing and building class consciousness that I was trying to point out, that some of the unions I've engaged with are maybe lacking, is precisely like not like making compromise compromises on politics. And there has been a shift by the unions as well as other more institutional left actors, such as like left political parties, to shift to the center in politics as a way to not lose their bases, to not lose the working class support. But that's going very badly, as we know, and it's not working out well. So I think we ought to like bring our radicality to everything that we're doing, especially if we are to not lose the working class again. Now I'm the one romanticizing it, but yeah, so just yeah, that was the last point.
Thank you very much. Just to also, like a lot of people already said this, just to say that this webinar on class is about exploring partly the second proposition that comes in the book, that shows up in the book. But exploring something doesn't mean explaining it necessarily, right? So there are so many different aspects with which we could be looking at it. We looked at it with these three angles or three filters, as you wish. Just want to also remind that the webinars are continuing. They are independent from each other, but they are still following a thread. The third webinar on models of transformation will happen on 3 of April. So you may want to know more about it on our website. So thank you very much for everyone who was here. I will give the word to Alice, but I also know that some people may have organized themselves to leave at this hour. For instance, Irina was saying. So I'll just give the space for if somebody wanted to leave, but whoever is available here, I'll give you the word. And apologies, I'm trying to manage the time constraints together with participation. Go ahead.
All right, so I won't be long. I will just say that in my experience, I generally encountered difficulties with two types of organizing, which is organizing within groups that consider themselves more intellectuals than workers, which I worked a lot of times in universities. And even if the pays were horrible, even if the working conditions themselves were very bad, the working hours were very long, but people were very resistant in defining themselves as workers. And also, I do struggle with what I see as the appropriation of a sort of precarious discourse by very privileged workers, at least in Romania. We have very the income base is extremely unequal. It's one of the most unequal countries, and in urban settings, I struggle a lot with people who with basically very privileged workers who are not willing exactly to show solidarity towards more precarious workers, but they do want the precarious discourse for themselves, which is something that frustrates me. And now I'm about to change domains and jobs, and I would be entry level again. And it's very interesting to me that the more precarious workers I get along fine with, but the higher I go up the hierarchy all the time in workers or whatever, the more frustrated and Sergio, I do become quite arrogant because it's very transparent to me that people are somehow protecting, their well-being, and they're not actually willing to engage in a way that is meaningful. So I guess what I wanted to say is that I also agree that there is no one agent in history, and also that categories need to be. I mean, I try to think in more micro groups by now. You can have a group of workers that is, more militant even before you show up, and they don't necessarily need you for much, except maybe encouragement. And you can have a group of workers that will never be militant because they're quite comfortable where they are. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for this webinar. We hope to see you in other following events, and also please do subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't done so that you can get more information about what's going on with the book project. Thank you very much. Cheers.